A raise. You should be grateful we even keep you. My wife's mother, Eleanor, laughed during my review. The whole leadership team nodded in agreement. I stood up, placed an envelope on the table, and said, "Thank you for your time." 3 days later, when they opened it and saw where I was going, you ever walk into a room already knowing it's a bad idea, but your wife says it's just a small review? "Babe, mom'll be nice." Yeah, famous last words. The kind of words that should come with a warning label, like those tags on mattresses that threaten federal prosecution if you remove them. Except in this case, the only thing getting removed was my faith in humanity, one condescending comment at a time. So there I was, sitting across from my wife, Sophia, her mother, Eleanor, the self-appointed CFO of everyone's life, not just the company's finances, and 7 board members who were all pretending to be incredibly busy with their leather portfolios and expensive pins that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. The conference room had that corporate smell. You know the one. It's like someone mixed air freshener with broken dreams and the faint aroma of backstabbing. The kind of room where natural light goes to die, replaced by fluorescent bulbs that make everyone look like they're auditioning for a zombie movie. I'd worked 7 years at that company. 7 years! That's longer than most people keep their New Year's resolutions, longer than the average Hollywood marriage, and definitely longer than anyone should tolerate being treated like the office furniture. I'd saved 3 major contracts that were circling the drain faster than my will to live during Monday morning meetings. I'd improved production time by 40, which in corporate speak means I basically performed a miracle without the benefit of divine intervention or even a decent bonus. And once, just once, I fixed a $1 million error before lunch. Not after a 3-day committee review, not after hiring expensive consultants, not after a company-wide prayer circle, before lunch. I literally saved them $1 million and still had time to eat my sad desk sandwich. So, when I walked into that performance review and politely, professionally, respectfully requested a raise, not a Ferrari, not a private jet, just a raise that would maybe let me buy name-brand cereal instead of the store brand that tastes like cardboard's disappointed cousin, I thought I had a shot. I mean, the audacity of me, right? Thinking that 7 years of loyalty and measurable results might translate into something as crazy as fair compensation. Eleanor looked at me like I had just asked her to donate a kidney. Then she laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a nervous giggle, but a full-on villain laugh that would have made cartoon bad guys jealous. The sound echoed off the glass table so loud I swear the thing vibrated. I half expected the windows to crack and birds to fall out of the sky. It was the kind of laugh that says, "You absolute fool. Did you really think you mattered here?"
"A raise," she said, wiping tears from her eyes like I had just told the funniest joke at the comedy club. "You should be grateful we even keep you." She emphasized the word keep like I was a stray dog they charitably allowed to sleep in the garage. Like my 7 years of documented excellence was some kind of charity case, a mercy employment situation they were graciously providing out of the goodness of their cold Excel spreadsheet hearts. The leadership team, and I use that term loosely because leadership implies they actually led something other than the charge toward mediocrity, nodded like those bobblehead dolls you see in the back windows of cars. Just automatic agreement, no thought required, no backbone detected. They sat there in their expensive suits that probably cost more than my requested raise, nodding along to Eleanor's dismissal of my worth like it was the most reasonable thing they had heard all week. Not one of them spoke up. Not one mentioned the contracts I saved. Not one acknowledged the 40% efficiency improvement that made their quarterly reports look good enough to frame. I smiled. But here's the thing about smiles. They're not all created equal. There's the happy smile, the nervous smile, the I'm being polite but dying inside smile that everyone perfects by their 3rd retail job. And then there's the smile I gave them, the dangerously calm kind, the kind that should come with its own warning system, like tornado sirens or that beeping noise trucks make when they're backing up. It was the smile of someone who had just made a decision, and not the kind of decision that involves choosing between chicken or fish at a wedding. "Noted," I said, my voice so level it could have been used for construction purposes. I reached into my bag, pulled out an envelope, crisp, white, professional, the kind you use for important documents or letters to Santa when you're really serious about that Red Ryder BB gun, and slid it onto that glass table. It made a satisfying sound, that soft whisper of paper against polished surface. Then I stood up, slowly, deliberately, like a man who had just set something in motion that couldn't be stopped even if they wanted to stop it, which they would very soon. "Is that another one of your suggestions?" Eleanor asked, her voice dripping with that special condescension that only comes from people who have never had to actually work for anything they have. She had inherited this company from her father, turned it into her personal kingdom, and treated everyone who wasn't blood-related like peasants lucky to toil in her fields. My suggestions, as she called them, had previously saved the company from bankruptcy, but sure, let's act like they were crayon drawings from a kindergartner. "Sort of," I replied, and I could feel Sophia's eyes burning into the side of my head, sending me telepathic messages that probably translated to, "Don't embarrass me in front of my mother and these important people." But you know what? I was way past caring about embarrassment. Embarrassment requires you to value the opinion of the people you're potentially embarrassing yourself in front of, and my respect meter for everyone in that room was reading somewhere below empty, in negative numbers, possibly approaching theoretical physics territory.
"You'll love what's inside," I added, and I meant every word. They would love it eventually, in the way that people love cautionary tales and lessons learned the hard way. They didn't open it right away, too busy exchanging confused glances, probably wondering if I had finally snapped and filled the envelope with glitter or anthrax or a strongly worded letter about their parking space assignments. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively, like she was shooing away a fly, and went back to her notes about quarterly projections and synergy and whatever other corporate buzzwords were trending that week. 3 days later, that envelope caused more chaos than a cat in a boardroom. More chaos than a fire drill during a board meeting. More chaos than someone announcing there's no more coffee in the break room on a Monday morning. Because inside that envelope wasn't anger or threats or dramatic declarations. It was something far more powerful in the corporate world. It was consequence, professionally packaged and formally delivered. It was the sound of dominoes starting to fall, set in motion by a man who had finally realized that sometimes the best way to win a rigged game is to stop playing by their rules and start playing by yours. When I first joined that company, I thought I had married into opportunity. You know, the American dream and all that jazz. Work hard, marry well, climb the ladder, retire with a boat you'll use twice before realizing you hate the ocean. I had visions of being the brilliant engineer who impressed everyone with innovation and skill, eventually earning respect through sheer competence. Turns out, I had married into management by family drama, which is less like climbing a corporate ladder and more like being trapped in a never-ending episode of a reality show where everyone's related and nobody gets voted off the island. Eleanor ran finances with an iron fist wrapped in a Chanel scarf. My wife Sophia was in HR, which sounds professional until you realize that every single workplace argument, every tiny disagreement, every moment of justified frustration ended with the same refrain. "Honey, Mom says you're being emotional again." Not, "Let's discuss this professionally." Not, "What's your perspective?" But a straight-up dismissal of my concerns, as if having feelings about being treated like garbage was somehow a character flaw. Like I was the problem for noticing I was being disrespected, not them for actually disrespecting me. Still, I was grateful for the job. At least, that's what I kept telling myself every morning when I'd pull into that parking lot, staring at the building like a prison I'd voluntarily walked into. I genuinely was thankful at first, back when I was young and stupid and believed that hard work actually mattered more than last names. I had just finished my engineering degree. Sophia and I were newlyweds, and Eleanor offered me a position in her company with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. "We need fresh minds," she'd said, shaking my hand with a smile that I now recognize as the same smile a spider probably gives a fly. "Someone with your technical skills could really make a difference here." And I did make a difference. I designed the calibration systems that made their production line faster, smoother, and more accurate than their competitors. I'm talking real innovation here, not just tweaking existing processes or slapping a fresh coat of paint on outdated equipment. I completely reimagined how their machines communicated with each other, created feedback loops that caught errors before they became expensive problems, and developed a monitoring system that predicted maintenance needs before equipment failed. It was the kind of work that engineering journals write articles about, the kind of stuff that companies patent and brag about at industry conferences. Every success was branded Eleanor's cost efficiency model. Every single one. I'd spend months developing a solution, testing it, implementing it, training the staff, and then watch as Eleanor stood in front of investors and board members, taking credit like she'd personally soldered the circuits and written the code. "My cost efficiency model has revolutionized our production capabilities," she'd say, gesturing at PowerPoint slides filled with my work, my diagrams, my innovations. My name would appear maybe once, buried in slide 17 of a 20-slide presentation, listed under team contributors alongside people who had literally done nothing but attend meetings and nod. Every failure? Daniel, you should have double-checked that. It didn't matter if the failure was because Eleanor cut the budget I'd requested, or because Mark from marketing promised features to clients that I'd explicitly said were impossible with our current timeline, or because someone in purchasing bought cheaper components than I'd specified. Somehow, some way, when things went wrong, my name was first on the blame list. Eleanor had a special talent for selective accountability, taking credit when things worked and distributing blame when they didn't. Like some kind of corporate Robin Hood, except instead of stealing from the rich to give to the incompetent, she was stealing credit from the competent to give to the incompetent. I wasn't mad. I was patient. At least that's what I told myself while gritting my teeth through another meeting where my ideas were dismissed when I said them and then praised when Mark repeated them verbatim 5 minutes later. I was playing the long game, I thought, building a reputation slowly but surely, documenting everything, keeping my head down and my work quality up. Until that review day. That day, Patience packed its bags, called an Uber, and left without saying goodbye. Patience looked at the situation, looked at me, shook its head, and said, "Man, I can't watch this anymore. You're on your own." Because here's what 7 years of being the underestimated son-in-law taught me. It doesn't matter how good you are if the people evaluating you have already decided you're not family in the way that counts. I was family enough to be invited to Thanksgiving dinners where I'd have to listen to Eleanor's stories about building this company from the ground up, conveniently forgetting that she'd inherited it from her father with an established client base and zero debt. I was family enough to be expected at every company function, every charity event, every tedious golf outing where middle-aged men in polo shirts talked about their portfolios and boat maintenance, but I wasn't family enough to be valued. I wasn't family enough to be heard. I wasn't family enough to deserve fair compensation for measurable, documented, revolutionary contributions to their bottom line. The really messed up part? I kept thinking it would change. That's the trap, right? You invest so much time, so much energy, so much of yourself into something that you start believing the sunk cost fallacy like it's a religious doctrine. I've already put in 7 years. Surely if I just work a little harder, stay a little later, save one more contract, prevent one more disaster, they'll finally see my worth. It's like being in a bad relationship where you keep thinking the other person will change if you just love them hard enough, try enough, sacrifice enough of yourself on the altar of their indifference. Sophia would tell me I was being paranoid when I'd mention feeling undervalued. "You're too sensitive," she'd say, not looking up from her phone. "Mom's under a lot of stress. The board expects results. You can't take everything so personally." But here's the thing about taking things personally. When someone's personally disrespecting you, personally underpaying you, personally taking credit for your personal work, it's actually appropriate to take it personally. That's not being sensitive, that's being conscious. I should have seen it coming. Honestly, all the signs were there from day one. I just chose to ignore them because I was in love and optimistic and stupid in that special way that only your 20s allow. Like that time in my second year when I saved the Patterson contract, a $3 million deal that was about to walk because our delivery timeline was impossible with current production speeds. I worked 70-hour weeks for 2 months straight, redesigned the entire workflow, and delivered 2 weeks early. Eleanor gave me a $50 gift card to Olive Garden and told me, "This is what team players do." A $50 gift card for saving a $3 million contract? I could have bought more respect at a dollar store. But I kept showing up, kept innovating, kept hoping, right up until that review day when Eleanor laughed in my face, and something inside me, not broke exactly, but shifted, like a bone setting wrong and suddenly clicking into the right position. That's when I realized that being underestimated wasn't an obstacle to overcome. It was an advantage to exploit.
You ever attend a meeting that's less about performance and more about family gossip? That's every Monday at Sterling Manufacturing. Hell, that's every day that ends in Y at Sterling Manufacturing. I'm talking about a workplace where the line between professional and personal doesn't just blur, it straight up doesn't exist. It packed its bags and moved to Canada, where it could live in peace, far away from the dysfunction that masqueraded as corporate culture in that God-forsaken building. Eleanor treated the boardroom like her living room, and I don't mean that in a cute, we're all family here kind of way that some companies try to sell you on while simultaneously denying your vacation requests. I mean, she literally conducted business meetings like she was hosting a book club for judgmental suburban moms who'd had too much wine and not enough therapy. She'd sip chamomile tea, always chamomile, always in this fancy porcelain cup that probably cost more than my first car, while criticizing everyone's posture, tone of voice, choice of tie, and general existence. "Daniel, slouching communicates weakness. No wonder suppliers negotiate with you so aggressively," she'd say, peering at me over her reading glasses like a disappointed school teacher who'd caught me passing notes in class. Never mind that those suppliers negotiated aggressively because I'd save the company 17% on materials costs by actually doing my homework and finding better vendors. Never mind that my so-called slouching was actually just my spine trying to escape my body after sitting through another 3-hour meeting that could have been an email. No, clearly the problem was my posture, not her complete inability to acknowledge competence when it was sitting right in front of her with excellent PowerPoint presentations and documented results. The Monday meetings were something special, though. Picture this, a mahogany conference table that probably required the sacrifice of an entire forest, uncomfortable leather chairs that squeaked every time you shifted your weight, which Eleanor interpreted as fidgeting and therefore disrespect, and a whiteboard that nobody ever used, because God forbid we actually brainstorm or collaborate like normal companies. Instead, we'd go around the table, each person reporting on their department, while Eleanor sipped her tea and occasionally interrupted with commentary that ranged from vaguely condescending to outright insulting. Meanwhile, her son-in-law wannabe, Mark, the marketing VP with NBA energy and the IQ of a couch cushion, smirked whenever I spoke. Every single time. I could be presenting a solution that would save millions, and Mark would be sitting there with this smug little grin like he knew something I didn't, which was hilarious because the only thing Mark knew was how to take credit for other people's ideas and which golf courses had the best brunches.
The guy had gotten his MBA from some online university that probably operated out of a P.O. box, spent more time networking than actually working, and somehow convinced Eleanor that synergizing brand vertical integration was a real thing that required a six-figure salary.
Mark's favorite move was the strategic interruption. I'd be mid-sentence, explaining something technical, something important, and he'd jump in with, "That's interesting, Daniel, but have we considered the optics here?" The optics, like we were running a political campaign instead of a manufacturing company? "How does this play with our brand narrative?" he'd ask, and Eleanor would nod thoughtfully, like he'd just quoted Aristotle instead of spewing meaningless corporate buzzwords he'd probably learned from a LinkedIn influencer. But I kept working. Late nights, endless projects, minimal recognition. The kind of schedule that makes your friends forget what you look like and your family start checking if you still live at your address. I'd be in the office until 9, 10, sometimes 11 at night, fine-tuning systems, running simulations, fixing problems that nobody else even knew existed yet. I'd go home, catch maybe 5 hours of sleep, and come back to do it all over again. Weekends? Those became a myth, a beautiful fairy tale I'd tell myself about that magical time when people apparently didn't work and did things like hobbies and relaxation. I thought hard work would earn respect. That's what they tell you, right? That's the whole American work ethic propaganda they feed you from childhood. Work hard, keep your head down, be reliable, be excellent, and eventually people will notice. Eventually you'll be rewarded. Eventually merit will matter. It's the same lie they tell you about how college degrees guarantee good jobs, and how if you just follow the rules, the system will be fair to you. Spoiler alert, the system is only fair if you're the one making the rules. And in this family business circus, Eleanor was ringmaster, lion tamer, and the person selling overpriced cotton candy all rolled into one. Spoiler, hard work only earns you more work and new insults delivered with spreadsheets. That's the secret they don't tell you in those motivational posters with eagles and mountains and words like persistence in dramatic fonts. When you're good at something in a dysfunctional company, they don't promote you or pay you more. They just pile more responsibility on your plate while keeping your compensation exactly where it is. Because why would they pay you more when you're already doing the work for less? It's basic economics, except the kind that only benefits them. Every time I solved a problem, I got 2 more problems assigned to me. Fixed the calibration issue? Great, now you're in charge of quality control too. Streamlined the production schedule? Fantastic, now you can also manage the inventory system. Saved a major client relationship? Wonderful, here's 3 more difficult clients that nobody else wants to deal with. It was like that Greek myth about the guy pushing the boulder up the hill, except instead of a boulder, it was an ever-growing pile of responsibilities. And instead of a hill, it was Eleanor's impossible expectations. And instead of being punished by the gods, I was being punished by my mother-in-law, who thought nepotism was a business strategy. The worst part wasn't even the work or the lack of recognition. It was the gaslighting, that special kind of crazy-making where they dismiss your concerns, undervalue your contributions, and then act shocked when you weren't enthusiastically grateful for the opportunity to be exploited. "We're giving you valuable experience," Eleanor would say when I'd hint at wanting fair compensation. "You should see this as an investment in your future." Lady, the only future I'm investing in is yours, and the returns are looking pretty dismal from where I'm sitting with my 7-year-old laptop and denied expense reports. Mark would chime in with his wisdom too. "Daniel, you've got to think long-term. Play the game. Rome wasn't built in a day."
Rome also wasn't built by people working for peanuts while someone else's name went on the buildings. But apparently, historical accuracy wasn't Mark's strong suit. Neither was self-awareness, basic human decency, or understanding that playing the game is a lot easier when your mother-in-law owns the board. So, yeah, I kept working. I kept showing up. I kept performing miracles on a tight budget with limited resources and even less appreciation. Right up until I didn't. Right up until that performance review when something inside me finally said, "You know what? This circus doesn't need me. Let's see how they do without a safety net." I'd spent 6 years saving that company millions, not in the abstract synergy way that Mark loved to talk about in meetings where he'd wave his hands around and claim his brand repositioning strategy had added value that couldn't quite be measured but was definitely super important. No, I'm talking actual, documentable, show it on a spreadsheet that even an accountant would trust, millions of dollars. The kind of money that has commas in it. The kind of savings that should have earned me a parade or at least a decent annual bonus, but instead got me a pat on the head and a "that's what we pay you for" from people who very clearly weren't paying me enough for it. I didn't even ask for a huge raise. Let me be crystal clear about this, because I don't want you thinking I walked in there demanding a corner office and a company yacht. I did my research like a responsible adult. I looked at industry standards, checked what engineers with my experience and track record were making at comparable companies, even factored in the family business discount where you supposedly make slightly less in exchange for job security and a friendly environment. Then I calculated a number that was fair, not generous, not extravagant, just fair, market value, the kind of salary that would let me maybe take a vacation without checking my bank account every 30 seconds, or buy the good coffee instead of the store brand that tastes like someone filtered it through old gym socks. Eleanor's response? Well, you already know about the laugh that could have registered on the Richter scale. But what came after was somehow even worse. She leaned back in her chair, that big executive chair that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary, and looked at me with this expression that I can only describe as amused contempt, like I was a toddler who just asked if I could drive the car, cute but delusional. "If you want extraordinary pay, show extraordinary results," she said, her voice dripping with that special kind of condescension that wealthy people reserve for explaining basic concepts to people they consider beneath them. She said it slowly, carefully, like she was speaking to someone who might not understand big words, like she was doing me a favor by explaining how the world works to my poor, confused brain. "Man, I literally made your company extraordinary. I wanted to scream it, tattoo it on my forehead, project it onto the side of the building in letters visible from space. I took your mediocre, struggling, barely keeping up with competitors' manufacturing operation and turned it into something that industry publications wrote articles about. I created systems that your competitors tried to copy. I saved contracts that your previous engineers said were impossible to fulfill. I fixed problems that nobody even knew existed until they would have exploded into 6-figure disasters. The Patterson contract? Saved it. $3 million that was walking out the door until I redesigned the entire production workflow in 60 days. The Meridian calibration crisis? Solved it. They were threatening legal action for defective equipment until I figured out the problem was in the sensor array configuration, not the equipment itself. Fixed it over a weekend, saved the company from a lawsuit that would have cost more than my lifetime salary. The production line efficiency improvements? Implemented them across all 3 facilities, resulting in a 40% increase in output without adding a single new piece of equipment or hiring additional staff. 40%! That's not just extraordinary, that's borderline miraculous. That's the kind of improvement that CEOs put in their memoirs and business schools turn into case studies. But sure, tell me about extraordinary results, Eleanor. Please, enlighten me about what constitutes achievement in your world. Because apparently saving your company multiple millions of dollars annually doesn't meet the threshold. What do I need to do? Cure cancer? Achieve world peace? Turn water into wine? Because I'm fresh out of miracles that you'll actually acknowledge.
The board chuckled. That's what really killed me. Not even full laughs, just these polite little chuckles, like Eleanor had made a clever joke at a dinner party. These people, these supposedly professional business people who were supposed to be evaluating performance objectively, just sat there and chuckled while my contributions were dismissed and my worth was casually degraded. They shuffled their papers, adjusted their expensive watches, and nodded along like this was perfectly reasonable. Not one of them spoke up. Not one of them said, "Actually, Daniel has a point. His results have been exceptional." Not one of them had the spine to acknowledge reality when it contradicted Eleanor's narrative. Sophia gave me that "don't embarrass me" glare from across the table. I knew that look intimately by this point. I'd seen it at family dinners when I'd questioned Eleanor's business decisions, at company parties when I'd had the audacity to correct factual errors about my own projects, at charity events when I'd failed to laugh enthusiastically enough at her husband's terrible jokes. It was a look that said, "You're making this difficult. Just smile and nod. Accept your place. Stop rocking the boat." A look that chose family loyalty over basic fairness, that prioritized not making waves over standing up for what was right. I took a deep breath, looked at the projector screen full of my achievements, every single one credited to team effort, or company initiative, or Eleanor's personal leadership, and realized I was done performing for free. Not just done with this particular conversation or this particular meeting, but done. Capital D, underlined, highlighted, said in bold font, done. I was done being the talented employee who made everyone else look good. Done being the safety net that caught every problem before it became a disaster while someone else took bows. Done being gaslit into thinking that wanting fair compensation for exceptional work was somehow greedy or entitled. The projector screen was still showing my presentation, the one I'd carefully prepared, with charts and graphs and documentation of every major contribution I'd made over the past 6 years. I'd spent hours on it, cross-referencing dates, calculating exact dollar amounts saved, gathering testimonials from clients and vendors. I'd even included comparisons to industry benchmarks, showing not just that my work was good, but that it was significantly above standard. It was airtight, undeniable, the kind of evidence that would hold up in any reasonable evaluation. But this wasn't a reasonable evaluation. This was a family protecting its territory, a power structure maintaining itself. A system designed to extract value from people like me while keeping us grateful for the opportunity to be exploited. And I finally understood that no amount of evidence, no degree of excellence, no quantity of saved millions was ever going to change that fundamental dynamic. That's when I planned the envelope, my calm revenge. No shouting, no drama, no burning bridges with dramatic speeches or thrown staplers. Just paper with consequences. Just documentation. Just the professional, formal, legally binding representation of a decision I should have made years ago. I'd spent 6 years playing by their rules, being patient, being professional, being the bigger person. Now it was time to play by different rules. Mine. The next morning, I walked into their meeting uninvited. Let me tell you,
There's a special kind of power that comes from walking into a room where you're not supposed to be, where everyone's sitting there expecting their usual boring agenda, and you just stroll in like you own the place. Which, technically, I didn't own the place. Eleanor made sure everyone knew exactly who owned the place, at least 3 times per conversation. But in that moment, I felt like I owned something way more valuable than the company. I owned my dignity, and I was about to cash that check. Same people sitting around that same ridiculous mahogany table that probably required the death of a tree older than the Constitution. Same smug smiles plastered on faces that had never known a day of real work in their lives. Eleanor at the head of the table, naturally, because God forbid she sit anywhere that didn't scream, "I'm in charge here." Mark to her right, probably mid-sentence about some meaningless marketing metrics that he'd pull out of thin air and present as gospel. The board members scattered around, looking important while contributing nothing, which was pretty much their primary job function. They all looked up when I walked in. You know that moment in a movie when the music stops and everyone freezes? It was like that, except instead of dramatic orchestral silence, it was just the awkward sound of Mark's voice trailing off mid-buzzword and the confused shuffling of papers. Eleanor's teacup paused halfway to her lips. Someone's pen stopped clicking. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. "Daniel, we're in the middle of something," Eleanor said, using that tone that mothers use when their toddler interrupts an adult conversation. That, "not now, sweetie, the grown-ups are talking," that somehow managed to be both dismissive and patronizing at the same time. She didn't even put down her teacup, just held it there, waiting for me to apologize and scurry back out like a well-trained puppy who'd wandered into the wrong room. "I know," I replied, and I could see her eyebrow twitch. That was her tell, that little eyebrow movement that showed up whenever something didn't go according to her carefully controlled script. I walked to the table slowly, deliberately, like I had all the time in the world. Because, guess what? I did. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't rushing to meet someone else's deadline or scrambling to solve someone else's emergency. I was operating on my own timeline now. I reached into my jacket pocket, and I swear Mark flinched a little, like I might pull out a weapon or a lawsuit, or maybe just a list of all the stupid things he'd said in meetings over the years, and pulled out the envelope. Crisp, white, professional, with the company name typed neatly on the front. I slid it across that polished table surface like I was pushing all my chips to the center of a poker table, betting everything on one hand. The envelope made that satisfying whisper sound as it glided across the wood, coming to rest perfectly in front of Eleanor's teacup. "What's this?" she asked. But her voice had changed. It wasn't quite as confident now. There was a tiny crack in that armor, a little note of uncertainty that I'd never heard before. She stared at the envelope like it might contain anthrax or legal documents, or, worst of all, something that might actually require her to acknowledge reality. "Something that'll make next quarter very interesting," I said. And I let that sentence hang in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. I didn't elaborate, didn't explain, didn't justify or defend or provide context the way I'd been trained to do over 6 years of explaining myself to people who never listened. Anyway, I just let those words sit there, loaded with implications and possibilities and the kind of vague threat that's somehow more unsettling than a specific one. Then I walked out. No dramatic music, although if my life had a soundtrack, this would have been the moment for something epic. No door slam, even though, man, I wanted to slam that door so hard the building would shake. But that would have been emotional. And the beautiful thing about what I was doing was how completely calm and professional it was. I was giving them exactly what they'd always demanded from me. Unemotional, businesslike, efficient, while simultaneously detonating a bomb under their comfortable little world. I walked out quietly, pulling the door closed behind me with a gentle click, and I started humming "Take This Job and Shove It" under my breath. The Johnny Paycheck version, not some sanitized cover. The real deal, the working man's anthem, the song that perfectly captured what every exploited employee has wanted to say to their boss since the invention of terrible jobs. I hummed it all the way down the hallway, past my now former office, past the break room where I'd eaten 1,000 sad lunches, past the bathrooms where I'd occasionally hidden for 5 minutes just to get some peace.
The receptionist, sweet girl named Chloe, who always remembered to save me the good donuts when they ordered breakfast, looked up as I walked past. "Leaving early, Daniel?" she asked, smiling like it was just another normal day. "Something like that," I told her, and I meant it in ways she couldn't possibly understand yet. "You take care of yourself, Chloe. You deserve better than this place." Her smile faltered a little, confused, but I kept walking. Out through the lobby with its pretentious modern art that Eleanor had commissioned from some artist friend of hers who charged 5 figures for paintings that looked like a toddler's finger painting project. Out through those glass doors that I'd walked through so many mornings feeling tired and unappreciated. Out into the parking lot where my car, nothing fancy, just reliable transportation that I'd bought used and maintained myself because my salary didn't exactly allow for luxury vehicles, was waiting like a getaway car. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, not starting the engine, just breathing. My hands weren't shaking, my heart wasn't racing. I felt calm in a way I hadn't felt in years. Like I'd been holding my breath underwater for so long that I'd forgotten what air tasted like, and I'd just broken the surface. This wasn't panic or anger or fear. This was clarity. They didn't open the envelope immediately, because arrogance and curiosity have terrible timing. And Eleanor's arrogance was legendary. I could picture her in there finishing her tea, probably making some dismissive comment about Daniel being dramatic again, setting the envelope aside while they returned to whatever meaningless agenda item they'd been discussing. Maybe Mark made a joke. Maybe someone suggested they should read it. Maybe Eleanor waved them off with that imperious hand gesture she loved, the one that said, "I'll deal with this when I feel like it, and I don't feel like it right now." She'd open it eventually, though, probably later that afternoon or maybe the next morning, when her curiosity finally overpowered her need to demonstrate that she wasn't concerned about anything her son-in-law might do. She'd open it with her letter opener, the fancy one that was probably a gift from some vendor trying to kiss up, expecting my resignation letter and maybe some bitter complaints that she could laugh about with the board. What she'd find instead would be so much better than that. So much worse for her, so much better for me. Because that envelope didn't just contain my resignation. It contained the sound of chickens coming home to roost, karma catching up with a first-class ticket, consequences arriving with express delivery. But I wasn't there to see her face when she opened it. And honestly, that was fine. Some pleasures you don't need to witness directly. Some satisfaction comes from just knowing it's happening somewhere, even if you're not in the room to see it. I started my car and drove away, still humming.
3 days later, my phone nearly exploded. I'm not being dramatic here. I mean, my phone literally started vibrating so continuously that it scooted itself across my kitchen counter like it was trying to escape the sheer volume of incoming panic. Calls, texts, voicemails, emails, LinkedIn messages, even a Facebook message request from Mark, which was hilarious because I'd never accepted his friend request in the first place. The man couldn't take a hint, even when it was delivered via social media rejection. It started early, 7 in the morning, which was way too early for anyone from Sterling Manufacturing to be functional, given that most of them rolled into the office around 9:30 with their overpriced coffee and their complete lack of urgency. But there it was, my phone lighting up with the HR department's number, then Eleanor's office line, then Sophia's cell, then numbers I didn't even recognize, which meant they were probably calling from personal phones because I'd been smart enough to block most of the company extensions after day 2 of radio silence. I let them ring, every single one of them. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my pajama pants and a t-shirt that had a coffee stain from 2019, eating cereal that was probably 90% sugar and watching my phone have a complete meltdown. It was therapeutic. Honestly, 6 years of jumping every time they called, dropping everything to handle their emergencies, interrupting my dinners and weekends and sleep because something was always urgent in Eleanor's world. Now I had nowhere to be, no crises to solve, and a bowl of artificially colored marshmallows masquerading as breakfast. Life was good. The voicemails started piling up. First one was from Sandra in HR, trying to sound professional and casual at the same time. "Hi Daniel, just hoping to chat with you about some paperwork. Give me a call back when you get a chance." Like I'd quit via interpretive dance and she wasn't sure if it counted. Second one was Eleanor's assistant, Karen, who sounded slightly more stressed. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Sterling would like to speak with you at your earliest convenience regarding your recent correspondence." Recent correspondence? Like I'd sent a thank you note, not a resignation letter via envelope. By voicemail number 7, they dropped the pretense entirely. Mark, sounding like he just realized his safety net had a giant hole in it. "Daniel, man, we need to talk. This is serious. Call me back, ASA." The desperation in his voice was chef's kiss perfect. This was the same guy who'd spent 6 years smirking at me across conference tables, and now he was manically calling like we were buddies who just had a little misunderstanding.
Sophia called 12 times before she finally left a voicemail. And when she did, it was that special combination of angry and panic that only spouses can achieve when you've done something they didn't approve of but are starting to realize might have been justified. "Daniel, what the hell is going on? Mom is freaking out. The board is freaking out. You need to call me back right now and explain what you were thinking." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Let's discuss this." Just straight to demanding explanations, like I was the one who'd done something wrong by refusing to be exploited anymore. I finished my cereal, made another bowl, watched 3 YouTube videos about woodworking, which I'd never tried but suddenly had time to consider as a hobby. My phone kept buzzing. I kept ignoring it. It was glorious. Around noon, I finally picked up. Not because I felt bad, I need to be clear about that, but because I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear the panic in their voices when they realized that the guy they'd been taking for granted had actually been holding up the entire operation like Atlas. And now, Atlas had shrugged, so the whole world was tumbling. "Daniel, what's in that envelope?" It was Eleanor, and she'd apparently decided to skip the pleasantries and go straight to interrogation mode. Her voice had that tight quality that meant she was trying very hard not to lose her composure, which was rich coming from someone who had laughed in my face 3 days ago. "My resignation and a transfer letter," I said, taking a sip of coffee. The good coffee now, by the way, the kind I'd been wanting to buy for years but couldn't justify on my insulting salary. Funny how much better coffee tastes when you're not being systematically undervalued. "Transferred where?" She said it like a demand, not a question. Still trying to maintain that authority, that sense that she had the right to know everything about my life because she'd employed me. Past tense, lady, past tense. "Oh, just the organization that certifies your entire industry. No big deal." I kept my voice light, casual, like I was mentioning I'd taken a job at the local grocery store or something equally mundane, like I hadn't just accepted a position at the one organization that had the power to make or break every single manufacturing company in the sector. Silence. Beautiful, profound, absolutely delicious silence. I could practically hear her brain short-circuiting, trying to process what I just said and what it meant for her company. I counted the seconds. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. By 5 Mississippi, I heard her breathing change. Then panic. Real, genuine, can't hide it anymore panic. Turns out the National Equipment Standards Authority, NESA for short, which everyone in the industry knew and either loved or feared depending on whether they were actually following regulations, had just hired me as their new chief compliance architect.
It was a position they'd created specifically after reviewing my application and work history, a position that gave me the authority to rewrite industry standards, conduct compliance audits, and basically decide which companies got to keep their certifications and which ones got shut down for not meeting requirements. The interview process had been going on for 3 months. 3 months of phone calls I'd taken in my car during lunch breaks, of video interviews I'd done from home while Sophia was at her yoga class, of reference checks with people in the industry who actually appreciated my work and weren't related to Eleanor. 3 months of preparing my exit strategy while still showing up every day to that office and doing my job with the same excellence they'd come to expect and completely failed to compensate. The offer letter had arrived 2 days before that performance review. Perfect timing, really. I'd been planning to give them one more chance, one more opportunity to do the right thing and actually value my contributions. And then Eleanor laughed at me for asking for fair pay. And suddenly that offer letter transformed from interesting opportunity to divine intervention. Eleanor suddenly found my phone number after 7 years of pretending I was still probationary. After 7 years of communicating through Sophia or her assistant, of treating me like I was too far down the organizational chart to deserve direct contact, suddenly she had my number memorized and was calling me personally. Funny how that works. Funny how someone becomes worth speaking to directly the moment they're no longer available to be exploited. "You can't do this," she said. And there it was, the desperation leaking through the authority. "This is your family. There's a conflict of interest here." "Actually, NESA's legal team cleared all of that before they made the offer," I replied. "I disclosed my employment history fully and transparently. They were particularly interested in someone with intimate knowledge of industry practices." I paused for effect. "Both the good practices and the less compliant ones." I could hear her breathing get faster. "Daniel, we need to discuss this. Come into the office. Let's talk about—" "I don't work there anymore, Eleanor. I don't have to come into the office. I don't have to discuss anything. I resigned. It's over. Have a great day." And I hung up. Just pressed that little red button and ended the call, cutting off whatever manipulation or threat or desperate bargaining she was about to attempt. Then I silenced my phone, poured another cup of that excellent coffee, and started reviewing NESA's current compliance standards. They had a lot of outdated protocols that needed updating. I had some ideas about that. At NESA, I finally had an office with a door that locked and coffee that didn't taste like regret. Let me tell you, that alone was worth the career change. The coffee situation at Sterling Manufacturing had been dire. Some bulk-purchased generic brand that tasted like it had been filtered through an old gym sock and then left to age in a rusty thermos for 3 weeks. The kind of coffee that you only drank because you needed the caffeine to survive another meeting where Eleanor took credit for your work. But at NESA, they had an actual espresso machine, like a real one, that cost more than my monthly salary at Sterling Manufacturing. They had beans from places I couldn't pronounce. They had oat milk and almond milk and options I didn't even know existed. It was beautiful. The office itself was nothing fancy. Standard government-adjacent building, fluorescent lights that hummed slightly, carpet that had seen better days, probably sometime in the early 2000s. But it was mine. My name on the door, my desk that nobody else had sat at, my filing cabinets that I got to organize however I wanted without someone telling me I was doing it wrong, and that lock on the door, that was pure poetry. After 6 years of working in an open-plan office where Eleanor could swing by any time to criticize my posture or question my methodology, having a door that locked felt like winning a lottery. My first assignment, rewrite calibration standards for the whole industry. They literally handed me the keys to the kingdom and said, "Hey, you know how everything's been done for the past 20 years? Yeah, we need to update all of that to reflect modern technology and best practices. How about it?" It was like giving a kid unlimited access to a candy store, except instead of candy, it was regulatory power. And instead of a kid, it was a very motivated former employee with 6 years of grudges and an encyclopedic knowledge of industry shortcuts that companies love to take. I spent my first week just reading, going through every existing standard, every compliance requirement, every loophole that companies had been exploiting since the regulations were written back when people still used fax machines unironically. I made notes, lots of notes. I cross-referenced with current technology. I consulted with other engineers who'd been frustrated by outdated standards that didn't reflect reality. I built a comprehensive framework for what modern compliance should actually look like. And then I started making a list of companies that would need to be audited under the new standards. Guess which company was first on that audit list? Go ahead, guess. I'll wait. Sterling Manufacturing, right there at the top, highlighted in yellow, flagged for comprehensive review. Not because I was being petty, okay, maybe 5% because I was being petty, but because they were genuinely one of the most visible companies in the sector. And if we were going to roll out new standards, we needed to audit the industry leaders first. That's just good regulatory policy. The fact that it also happened to be poetic justice was merely a happy coincidence that I smiled about every single morning during my excellent coffee. The audit notification went out on a Tuesday. Standard official letter, very professional, outlining the new compliance requirements and informing Sterling Manufacturing that they'd been selected for one of the first comprehensive audits under the updated framework. They had 60 days to prepare all documentation, provide access to facilities, and demonstrate compliance with the new standards. Very by the book, very official, very much going to be a nightmare for them because I knew exactly which corners they'd been cutting. When they saw the new compliance checklist, Eleanor called me personally again because apparently my phone number was now permanently saved in her contacts under "Call when everything is on fire." I let it go to voicemail the first 3 times because I was in a meeting about regulatory enforcement procedures and also because making her wait was satisfying in ways that therapy could never achieve. When I finally called her back during business hours, very professional, from my office with the door locked, she didn't even bother with hello. "You're targeting us." Her voice was shrill, accusatory, like I'd personally keyed her car or kidnapped her dog. "This audit is retaliation. This is personal. You can't do this." I leaned back in my chair, my comfortable office chair that didn't squeak like the garbage furniture at Sterling Manufacturing, and smiled at the ceiling. "No, ma'am, I'm just making excellence mandatory." "Don't you ma'am me, Daniel. You know exactly what you're doing. These standards are impossible to meet." "They're really not," I said calmly. "They're actually quite reasonable. They just require companies to actually do what they've been claiming to do for years. You know, things like regular equipment calibration, accurate quality control documentation, transparent reporting of defects. Basic stuff." "Basic?" She was practically sputtering. "You're requiring recertification of every piece of equipment, full traceability documentation, third-party verification? Do you know how expensive that is?" "About as expensive as doing things right the first time, I imagine." I was enjoying this way too much. "Look, Eleanor, these standards apply to every company in the industry. You're not being singled out. If anything, you should have an advantage. You've got all those years of Eleanor's cost efficiency models to fall back on, right? All those innovations that were definitely real and definitely documented properly." The silence on the other end was loud enough to hear. Because here's the thing about taking credit for other people's work. Eventually, someone might ask you to prove you actually did it. And when all the real documentation has someone else's name on it, that becomes awkward real fast. "This is unethical," she finally said, but her voice had lost that aggressive edge. Now she just sounded tired. "You worked for us. You have insider knowledge. This is a conflict of interest." "Already cleared by NESA's ethics board, legal department, and my direct supervisor," I replied cheerfully. "I disclosed everything. They were actually impressed by my familiarity with industry practices, said it made me uniquely qualified to identify areas where standards needed strengthening. Turns out knowing where all the bodies are buried makes you excellent at writing regulations.
Daniel, please. And there it was, the begging. After 6 years of condescension, dismissal, and that laugh that still echoed in my nightmares, Eleanor was actually begging. We can work something out. Come back to the company. We'll give you that raise. We'll make you VP of engineering. You'll do nothing, I interrupted, my voice still pleasant but firm. Because I don't work for you anymore. I work for an organization that ensures companies like yours actually maintain the standards they claim to uphold. The audit is scheduled for 6 weeks from now. I suggest you use that time wisely. Review the checklist, gather your documentation, make sure everything is actually compliant and not just compliant-ish. But have a great day, Eleanor. Oh, and make sure your calibration certificates are current. We'll be checking those very carefully. I hung up before she could respond. Funny thing about karma, it doesn't knock politely and wait for you to answer. It doesn't send a courtesy email or schedule a meeting at your convenience. It just shows up, walks right in, sits down at the head of the table, and starts asking questions you really don't want to answer. Karma doesn't care about your excuses or your family connections or how many board members nod along with your nonsense. Karma emails. Karma audits. Karma has a comprehensive checklist and 60 days notice. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, Karma has excellent coffee and an office that locks. Sterling Manufacturing failed their certification audit spectacularly. And when I say spectacularly, I mean it was the kind of failure that would be studied in business school case studies for years to come. The kind of failure that makes industry publications send reporters. The kind of failure that's so complete, so thorough, so absolutely comprehensive that it's almost impressive in its scope. If failing audits was an Olympic sport, Sterling Manufacturing would have taken home the gold medal, the silver medal, and probably would have been caught cheating to get the bronze too. The audit team showed up on schedule. 3 auditors, all professionals I trained personally on the new standards, all armed with clipboards, tablets, and the kind of polite skepticism that comes from years of catching companies trying to fake their way through inspections. They weren't there to bust anyone specifically, they were just there to verify compliance. If Sterling Manufacturing had actually been doing what they claimed to be doing for the past decade, it would have been a routine audit. Tedious, sure. Time-consuming? Absolutely, but passable. They weren't passable. The auditors found outdated systems everywhere. Equipment that was supposed to be calibrated quarterly last calibrated 18 months ago. And the documentation had been clearly backdated because whoever forged the signatures didn't realize the inspector whose name they used had retired 2 years before the supposed calibration date. That's the thing about lying. You've got to be good at it, and you've got to keep track of your lies. Eleanor's team was neither good at it nor organized enough to maintain the fiction. They found false reports stacked in filing cabinets like archaeological layers of deception. Quality control tests that had never been run but had passing grades documented. Safety inspections that claimed to have been conducted on equipment that had been sold 6 months before the supposed inspection date. It was like someone had played a game of how many violations can we commit and decided to go for the high score. Expired quality tests were everywhere, and I mean expired by years, not weeks. They had certificates on the wall from 2019 that were supposed to be renewed annually. They had documentation referencing standards that NESA had retired in 2021. They had training certifications for employees who didn't work there anymore, or in one beautiful case, for an employee who'd never existed. Someone had apparently invented a person, given them credentials, and used their fake signature on documents for 3 years before anyone noticed. All under Eleanor's signature. Every single falsified document, every backdated report, every expired certification that claimed to be current, her signature was on the authorization. Maybe she'd signed them without reading them, which would make her incompetent.
Maybe she'd signed them knowing they were false, which would make her fraudulent. Either way, her name was on everything, which in the regulatory world is all that matters. The buck stops where the signature sits, and her signature was everywhere, like she'd been playing a game of corporate Mad Libs with compliance documents. They begged for an extension. Oh, they begged. First, it was Eleanor calling my boss, not me. She'd learned that lesson, asking for just a few more weeks to gather some paperwork that seems to have been misfiled. Then it was their corporate lawyers sending official letters about extenuating circumstances and good faith compliance efforts. Then it was board members reaching out to their contacts at NESA, trying to find someone who'd be willing to slow down the process, maybe lose some paperwork, perhaps misunderstand some regulations. But here's the beautiful thing about working for a regulatory agency with actual integrity. Nobody could intervene for them. NESA wasn't a family business where knowing the right person got you special treatment. It was a government-adjacent organization with oversight committees and public accountability. Every decision was documented. Every extension request was reviewed by multiple people. Every attempt to curry favor or pull strings just generated more paperwork that made the whole situation look worse. I couldn't intervene, of course. Conflict of interest. I had to recuse myself from any direct decisions involving Sterling Manufacturing. I wasn't in the room when they discussed the audit results. I didn't participate in the certification review board meetings. I didn't touch any of the paperwork related to their case. I was completely, professionally, ethically separated from the entire process. But I did smile when NESA's report was published. Public record, available to anyone who wanted to read it, and it recommended immediate leadership restructuring and comprehensive operational overhaul required before recertification can be considered. That's government speak for, your management is so incompetent that we can't trust anything you say until you fire everyone in charge and start over. It's the regulatory equivalent of a teacher telling your parents that you're not just failing, you're dragging down the entire class and maybe should repeat the grade at a different school where you can't contaminate anyone else with your failure. The report was 37 pages long. I didn't read it at work, that would have been inappropriate, but I definitely read it at home that night, sitting on my couch with a beer that I could now afford the good version of, and it was better than any thriller novel I'd ever picked up. Every page was another violation discovered, another falsified document exposed, another safety shortcut documented. It read like a greatest hits compilation of everything you're not supposed to do in manufacturing. A month later, the family empire was bleeding clients. Not slowly, not gradually, but hemorrhaging them like a severed artery. Because when your certification gets suspended, your clients can't legally use your equipment. And when clients can't use your equipment, they stop buying your equipment. And when they stop buying your equipment, they call your competitors. Your competitors who still have valid certifications and aren't currently under regulatory investigation. The Patterson contract, the $3 million one I'd saved back in my Sterling Manufacturing days, they jumped ship so fast they left skid marks. Called up their account manager, terminated the contract, citing the compliance issues, and signed with Sterling's biggest competitor within a week. Meridian? Gone. Henderson Manufacturing? Gone. Every major client that had options exercised those options and ran for the exits like the building was on fire, which, metaphorically speaking, it was. The building was definitely on fire, and Eleanor was standing in the middle of it, insisting that everything was fine, this was all a misunderstanding, they'd clear this up in no time. Except it wasn't fine. It wasn't a misunderstanding, and no time was looking more like never with each passing day. Their stock price, they'd gone public 5 years ago, one of Eleanor's brilliant moves to raise capital, dropped 43% in 2 weeks. 43%! I watched it fall in real time on my phone during lunch breaks, and it was mesmerizing. Better than any reality TV show, more dramatic than any soap opera. Just this steady, relentless decline as investors realized that the company's foundation was built on falsified paperwork and Eleanor's ego. Their new slogan could have been, "Innovation pending," or maybe, "Excellence sometime later." Or perhaps, "We promise we'll actually do the things we said we were doing once we figure out how." They'd spent years marketing themselves as industry leaders, cutting-edge innovators, the gold standard of manufacturing excellence. Now they were the cautionary tale, the example of what happens when you prioritize image over substance, when you cut corners and hope nobody notices, when you build an empire on someone else's work and then laugh when they ask for recognition. The schadenfreude was real, folks. So very real. Desperate, Eleanor filed a complaint against me. Because of course she did. When you've spent your entire career blaming other people for your problems, why stop now? When the walls are closing in and your empire is crumbling and your stock price is in freefall, the natural response isn't self-reflection or accountability. It's finding someone else to blame. And who better to blame than the son-in-law who dared to leave, who had the audacity to succeed somewhere else, who had the unmitigated gall to enforce the standards she'd been pretending to meet for years. The complaint was filed with NESA's ethics board, copied to the Industry Regulatory Commission, and somehow also leaked to 3 different trade publications, because Eleanor had never met a problem she couldn't try to solve with public relations. The document was 12 pages long. 12 pages of accusations, insinuations, and legal language that basically boiled down to one claim. He used insider information to hurt us. Insider information? Like knowing that companies should actually calibrate their equipment was some kind of trade secret? Like understanding that quality control reports should reflect actual tests performed was proprietary knowledge that I'd stolen? Like the expectation that certifications should be current and not expired was some kind of confidential business intelligence that I'd weaponized against my former employer? Ma'am, if competence is insider information, then guilty as charged. Lock me up and throw away the key for the crime of knowing how to do my job properly and expecting others to do the same. Arrest me for the heinous act of understanding industry regulations and believing they should be followed. Convict me for the terrible sin of thinking that when a company says they meet safety standards, they should actually meet safety standards, instead of just saying they do while cutting every corner they can find and inventing new corners to cut. The complaint alleged that I designed the new standards specifically to target Sterling manufacturing, that I'd used my knowledge of their internal processes to create requirements they couldn't meet, that I'd orchestrated the entire audit as a personal vendetta. It painted me as some kind of vengeful mastermind who'd spent months crafting elaborate regulatory traps, like I was a supervillain in a movie, except instead of a death ray, my weapon was properly documented calibration procedures. The thing is, to believe Eleanor's version of events, you'd have to believe that I'd somehow convinced NESA to create a new position, hire me, let me rewrite industry-wide standards that would affect hundreds of companies, and conduct audits that would be reviewed by multiple independent parties, all as part of an elaborate revenge plot against one company. You'd have to believe that dozens of engineers, regulators, and oversight committee members were all in on my personal grudge. You'd have to believe that the entire regulatory apparatus of a government-adjacent organization was actually just my personal vengeance machine. Or, alternatively, you could believe the simpler explanation, that Sterling Manufacturing had been cutting corners for years, I'd been covering for them while I worked there, and once I left, there was nobody competent enough to maintain the facade. Occam's razor, people. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. And the simplest explanation here was that Eleanor had been running a company on credit she didn't deserve, and the bill had finally come due. The NESA board reviewed every document, and every single innovation I'd been denied credit for. That was the part Eleanor hadn't considered when she filed her complaint. When you accuse someone of misconduct, you open up an investigation. And investigations look at everything. They don't just examine the allegations. They examine the context, the history, the relationship between the parties involved. NESA's ethics board started pulling records. They looked at my personnel file from Sterling Manufacturing, which was a masterpiece of damning with faint praise and credit theft. They examined the patents and innovations that Sterling Manufacturing had filed over the past 7 years, every single one of which listed Eleanor or the company itself as the inventor, despite the supporting documentation clearly showing my name all over the actual development work. They reviewed industry publications where Eleanor had been quoted talking about her innovations, using language and technical details she clearly didn't understand. They interviewed former colleagues who confirmed that, yes, I'd been the actual brains behind most of Sterling's recent success, and no, I'd never been properly credited or compensated for it. They talked to vendors and clients who remembered working with me specifically, who'd asked for me by name because they knew I was the one who actually understood the systems. They examined emails and project files and meeting minutes that painted a very clear picture of a talented engineer being systematically exploited by a family business that valued loyalty over competence and relationships over results. And then they looked at the new NESA standards I developed. They had independent experts review them. They compared them to international best practices and recommendations from engineering associations. They analyzed whether the requirements were reasonable, achievable, and appropriate for the industry. Their verdict? Mr. Carter maintained exceptional records and integrity. The standards developed under his leadership reflect industry best practices and appropriate safety requirements. Complaint dismissed. But they didn't stop there. The report continued. Furthermore, the complaint appears to be retaliatory in nature, filed in response to legitimate regulatory enforcement. The ethics board finds no evidence of bias, misconduct, or inappropriate use of prior employment knowledge. Mr. Carter's work at NESA has been exemplary, and his recusal from direct decisions regarding his former employer demonstrates proper understanding of conflict of interest protocols. It was beautiful. The report was public record, published on NESA's website, available for anyone to download and read. It wasn't just a dismissal of Eleanor's accusations. It was a vindication of everything I'd been saying for years. It was official, documented proof that I'd been right, they'd been wrong, and their complaint was nothing more than a desperate attempt to blame someone else for their own failures. Eleanor's face during the press briefing looked like someone had unplugged her Wi-Fi mid-speech. NESA held a press conference to address the complaint because it had gotten enough industry attention that they wanted to be transparent about the resolution. Eleanor wasn't there in person. She'd sent their corporate lawyer, poor guy, but someone had set up a video call so she could watch from the office. And you could see her in the background of one of the trade publication photos that ran with the story. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 2 months. Her carefully maintained appearance had cracks in it. Her hair wasn't quite as perfectly styled. Her expression had this glazed quality of someone who just realized that the universe doesn't actually revolve around them, that consequences are real, and that you can't lawyer your way out of objective failure. The press briefing made it clear. I'd done everything correctly. Sterling Manufacturing had failed on their own merits, or lack thereof, and trying to blame the regulatory agency was just embarrassing for everyone involved. One reporter asked the obvious question. If Mr. Carter's standards are so impossible to meet, how are the other 73 companies in the sector passing their audits? The lawyer didn't have a good answer for that one. Meanwhile, my new project was getting global attention. While Eleanor was busy filing complaints and watching her company implode, I'd been working on something actually useful, a framework to credit engineers for their own inventions. Months later, Eleanor showed up at my new office looking like she'd been emotionally steamrolled. And I don't mean that in a casual, rough day at the office way. I mean she looked like life had picked her up, examined her carefully, and then thrown her face first into a wall labeled consequences repeatedly until the lesson sank in. Her designer suit was still expensive, but it hung on her differently now, like she'd lost weight from stress rather than those boutique fitness classes she used to brag about. Her hair was still professionally colored, but you could see the gray roots starting to show. Apparently, she'd had to start spacing out her salon appointments. Recession hits everyone differently, and Eleanor's recession was looking personal. I was in my office, my actual, legitimate, earned-through competence office, reviewing a proposal from the European Standards Committee about harmonizing international calibration requirements when my assistant buzzed me. "Mr. Carter, you have a visitor, Eleanor Sterling from Sterling Manufacturing. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent." Everything was urgent with Eleanor. The sun rising was urgent, her tea getting cold was urgent, other people having boundaries was urgent. But I was curious, I'll admit it. Curious about what could possibly bring her to my office after months of silence following the spectacular dismissal of her complaint. Curious about what she wanted badly enough to show up unannounced at the organization that had essentially dismantled her reputation.
"Send her in," I said, and I made sure to keep working on my laptop right up until she walked through the door. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. Let her see me being busy and important and completely unbothered by her presence. Let her stand there for a few seconds while I finished typing a sentence, the same way she'd made me wait outside her office countless times over the years. When I finally looked up, she was standing in front of my desk like a defendant at sentencing. No power pose, no imperious confidence, none of that Eleanor energy that used to fill rooms and make people nervous. She looked diminished. That's the word, diminished. "Daniel," she said, and her voice was different too. Quieter, missing that edge of automatic authority she'd wielded like a weapon for as long as I'd known her. "Thank you for seeing me." Thank you. Eleanor said thank you to me. I almost checked the window to see if pigs were flying past or if the sky was falling in chunks. "I have 15 minutes before my next meeting," I said, which was true. I had a video call with a manufacturing consortium in Singapore about implementing the new standards across Southeast Asia. International regulatory harmonization waits for no one, not even awkward confrontations with former family members. "What can I do for you, Eleanor?" She sat down without being invited, but the way she did it was different from the old days. Back at Sterling Manufacturing, she'd sit down like she owned every chair she touched, like furniture existed solely for her convenience. Now she sat carefully, almost hesitantly, like she wasn't sure she had permission to occupy space. "The board wants to negotiate," she said, getting straight to the point. Maybe humiliation had taught her efficiency. "Public credit for your innovations. Back pay for your contributions. We're even discussing naming rights for your calibration method, the Carter methodology. It would be in all our materials, all our patents, everything." I leaned back in my chair and just looked at her for a moment. The Carter methodology. My name on the work I'd actually done, the innovations I'd actually created, the systems I'd actually designed. The thing I'd been asking for, begging for 6 years, and been told I was being entitled and ungrateful for wanting. Now they were offering it up like a gift, like they were doing me a favor by finally admitting the truth. "But," I asked, because there's always an else. People like Eleanor don't show up offering amends unless there's something in it for them. "We want you to consult," she said, and there it was. "Help us meet the new standards, redesign our systems. Your expertise could—" I laughed. Not the polite chuckle you give when someone makes a moderately amusing joke, but a real, genuine laugh that came from somewhere deep in my chest. The kind of laugh that startled her, made her flinch back in her chair like I'd thrown something at her. "You want me to fix the mess you made by ignoring everything I told you for years? You want me to consult, at what rate, by the way, to implement the systems I designed years ago that you claimed credit for but apparently never actually understood? You want me to save you again, except this time you'll spell my name right in the acknowledgments?" "Daniel, the company is in trouble. The company's been in trouble since you started running it like your personal kingdom,"
I interrupted. The difference is, now there's nobody covering for you, nobody working overtime to fix your mistakes, nobody preventing disasters before you even know they exist. You're finally experiencing the actual consequences of your decisions, and it turns out they're not great. Eleanor's face did something complicated, part anger, part shame, part desperation. We're prepared to offer very generous terms, six-figure consulting contract, equity stake, board position if you want it. I don't need your money, Eleanor. And that was the truth. NESA paid me well, really well actually, because they valued expertise and paid market rates like a normal organization. Plus, the consulting offers I'd been getting from companies that actually wanted to pass their audits were extremely lucrative. I'd made more in the past 3 months than I'd made in 2 years at Sterling Manufacturing. Just integrity. We're offering you integrity, she said, her voice rising with frustration. Public credit, your name on everything. What more do you want? I wanted that 6 years ago, I said quietly. I wanted it when I was saving your contracts. I wanted it when I was fixing your mistakes. I wanted it when I asked for a simple raise and you laughed in my face. You're not offering me integrity, Eleanor. You're offering me damage control. There's a difference. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish trying to breathe on land. So that's it? You're just going to let the company fail? I'm not letting anything happen. The company's failing because you ran it poorly, lied about your capabilities, and built your success on someone else's work. That's not my responsibility to fix. That's yours. I glanced at my watch, and my meeting starts in 5 minutes, so unless there's something else. She stood up, slowly, gathering her purse, and for a moment she looked like she might say something else. Maybe an apology, maybe another plea, maybe even some recognition of what she'd done wrong. But in the end, she just nodded once and walked toward the door.
Eleanor, I called out, and she turned back, hope flickering across her face like maybe I changed my mind. For what it's worth, if you just valued people appropriately from the start, none of this would have happened. Something to think about. She left without responding. Eventually, their company did adopt my transparency framework, not because Eleanor suddenly grew a conscience, but because the board forced it through after 3 more quarters of declining revenue and 2 executive departures. They went from mocking me for asking for a raise to printing my name on plaques that hung in their lobby. Sterling Manufacturing utilizing the Carter calibration methodology. I saw photos of it in a trade publication. The irony was delicious. Sophia divorced me 2 weeks after Eleanor's visit to my office. Apparently, success isn't attractive when you can't control it. She wanted the struggling engineer she could manage, not the respected professional who'd built something independently. The divorce papers cited irreconcilable differences, which was lawyer speak for, "You stopped letting me and my mother treat you like garbage." I sent her flowers after the papers were finalized. Yellow roses, which symbolize friendship and new beginnings. I wrote them off as a business expense. Closure counts as professional development, right? Now, whenever I see Sterling Manufacturing on a compliance form, and I see them regularly because they're on probationary certification status, which means extra monitoring and quarterly reviews, I smile. Not a vindictive smile exactly, more like the satisfied smile you get when you see the universe working the way it's supposed to, when cause and effect line up properly, when people finally experience the logical consequences of their choices. Their motto now reads, "Raising Standards." Some marketing consultant probably charged them $50,000 for that gem, completely oblivious to the irony. Or maybe perfectly aware of the irony and laughing all the way to the bank. Either way, it's printed on everything, their letterhead, their website, their trade show banners. Sterling Manufacturing, Raising Standards. How ironic. How perfectly, beautifully, magnificently ironic. Because the only raise I ever wanted, the only raise that actually mattered, was the one where I walked out with my dignity intact.
where I stopped measuring my worth by their valuation and started measuring it by my own standards, where I raised my expectations for how I deserve to be treated and refused to accept anything less.
That raise didn't come with a bigger paycheck from them. It came with self-respect, professional recognition, international consulting offers, and the deep satisfaction of watching karma work its magic in real time. It came with excellent coffee, an office door that locks, and the knowledge that I built something bigger than revenge. I built a legacy. I built standards that actually protect people and improve the industry. I built a reputation based on competence rather than connections. I built a career where my name means something because of what I've done, not whose family I married into. And every single day when I go to work, I'm reminded that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just living well, doing excellent work, and watching the people who underestimated you realize exactly how much they lost when you walked away. Turns out that's worth more than any raise they could have offered.